Good morning, everybody. Believe it or not, there are more people than me around today. So if you got tired from inside, I'll be doing one more session later, but there's others that you can go to where you don't have to put up with me per se. But anyway, you're all very welcome along to this breakout session here in the Energy Pavilion, which, as you know, energy being a very important cornerstone of today's event here in Garteen. So between now and about 20 past 11 or so, we're going to have a chat and hear from four of our panellists here, whom we're delighted to have, and they all got here safe and sound. I think, Mark, got a little bit lost, but you made it in time anyway. That's the main thing. So, all right, okay. Energy Policy, the Path to 2030. That's the title. So, I mean, 2030, when you think about it, it's only few years away at this stage, and there was a time we would have thought 2030 is way away, but it's like 5, 8, 6, 7 years away at this stage. And we do need, obviously, to look at the whole issue of energy and alternatives. And as the Minister was saying at the last session, what's happened in Europe over the last 12 months has just accelerated our thought process when it comes to renewables and energy alternatives. So with us today, we have Oisin, Director of Friends of the Earth; Mark Foley, who's the CEO of Eirgrid; Declan is the Director of Business, Public Sector and Transport with the SEAI; and Stephen Robb is the former Farm Tillage, Ag Innovation and Renewable Specialist with the Irish Farmers Journal, but in recent times has moved to A.I.B, New Business Development. So you're all very welcome today. Oisin, I think I'll begin with you. When it comes to energy, you know, we're witnessing an unravelling almost of the path that we were on in Europe because of what's happening in Russia and the cut in gas supplies from there. We see Germany, Austria, I think the Netherlands are all firing up their coal again. How concerning is that in where we are at the moment?
Morning, Damien. I don't know if I would use the word unravelling. There's certainly a tension. Two things are happening at once. Because I think the underlying reality is that the lesson people have drawn from the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is that we need to get off fossil fuels even more, because it's it's gas and particularly gas that's driving the price increases. It's being used as a weapon of war. It's not the renewables that is driving the price increases even before the war happened. So it is fossil fuels. And now we know not only do they drive prices, they're also, of course, driving pollution, and they're being used as a weapon of war. So in the short term, yes, there's tensions, and we're seeing countries firing up coal or looking for alternative gas imports, but we're also seeing, as part of the EU's repower strategy, a drive to just reduce gas demand and reduce demand for fossil fuels. And I think we're seeing a doubling down or an acceleration of and a recommitment to the drive for renewables.
But you'd obviously be hoping that this is short term. We all hope the whole war situation is short term. But when I say unravelling, it will unravel over time.
I don't think so. I'm sure we'll touch on this, not just me. I think the thing that we need to get across, and I think this is present in the EU debate, but this is the tension. Do we look for more sources of fuels, whether they are renewables or gas, or do we reduce demand? Because in the short term, the fastest route to avoiding the price spikes, to reducing pollution, and to avoid giving Putin more money, is to reduce how much fuel we need. So it is around the retrofitting, it's around alternatives for transport, it's around all of those things, what we need to do, like turning down your thermostat by 1 degree, which is something that, you know, maybe green, you did as a tip because green people told you. Now you do it to save money.
So we've been left very exposed, haven't we, by what's happening in Russia and Ukraine?
Well, Europe as a whole is certainly challenged. We're lucky enough in Ireland, and I'm sure others will touch on this too, that our gas supply does not come, it's less than 3% of our gas supply comes directly from Russia in any way whatsoever. It all comes from the Corrib field, about a third of it, and most of it then comes, the rest of it comes via the UK, but mostly from the North Sea and from Norway. And that the physical connection is not under threat. We have a robust agreement, I'm sure the others will touch on this, with the UK that would be treated like the rest of the UK distribution system for our interconnector with gas. But obviously we are exposed to the price rise.
Yes.
We can't escape that. But nobody can escape that. We're learning that now.
Okay, Stephen, you've reported extensively during your time in the Farmers Journal about the opportunity of biomethane to supply renewable home gas. What percentage of our requirements could be met by biomethane? Where are we with anaerobic digestion, biogas, biomethane, all of that?
Yeah, it's a drum that we've beaten for a very long time, and to be honest, I'm sitting here a wee bit stunned at the minister's comments from this morning, because I've never seen him or indeed his party get behind AD as strongly before. At one point they were staunchly against it. Look, I think theoretically Ireland could comfortably produce enough indigenous biomethane to meet 10 or 11% of our natural gas supply. That equates to roughly, off the top of my head, I think it's 6.5 terawatt hours roughly. Now, from a practical point of view, we're really looking at around 1.6 terawatt hours, so a fraction of that. That's actually a target set out in the Climate Action Plan. Now, that's still substantial. It equates to about 120 plants or so, so it's no mean feat, but it's considerably less than our potential, and I think that's because we're really starting from a cold start. You know, we have, 20 AD plants in the country. The majority of them are municipal. We have a handful of old generation plants, we'll say, which are producing electricity through CHP. But look, the new model is biogas to biomethane and into the grid or off grid, and it's looking like it's going to happen.
Yeah, and we have Project Clover. You know that there is a really, really strong momentum behind it now. All we're missing is kind of government action on it. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's been a really strong driving force behind the AD movement in Ireland, and all credit to them. I think we've just been lacking is in follow through. There's an appetite at farm level. There certainly was a bit of concern at farm level. There was a bit of concern at IFA level as well. But I think that that's all been ironed out. You know, there's been a lot of work done on trying to determine how much feedstock we have in the country, and could we comfortably supply 120, 125 plants. The answer is yes, we can, and we can actually do it without even impacting the national herd if that's the model which we decide to choose. But I've always been very firm in my opinion on this. If it's more profitable for a farmer to grow feedstock for an AD plant than raise livestock, then it's his or her decision. It's their prerogative.
Okay, and I'll come to Declan and Mark in a moment, but just then back to you, Oisin. What did you make of the Minister's comments, and where do you stand in relation to anaerobic digestion and its potential in Ireland?
I mean, we think it has a role to play. We'd be sceptical as to how big a role it can play realistically. I think we'd be more inclined to think that the Climate Action Plan targets are probably would take a lot of effort, but they're at the upper end of what's realistic and what's useful. But we think it has a role to play, and we understand that it could have benefits for farming communities. But there's a lot of nuts and bolts to be ironed out, so to speak.
Okay, and Declan, just I suppose on that, when we look at the range of renewable options that we have in this country, we talk about wind power, solar, anaerobic digestion. I suppose the one that we never really talk about is nuclear. But is that something that we could be looking at in Ireland?
It's not part of the policy in terms of from an Ireland point of view, and realistic. Mark would talk about it probably easier in terms of the grid. When we look at the grid, nuclear is a massive generation in one location, and putting that in one place and trying to sit it on our grid, it just wouldn't physically work from our point of view. It's part of the mix from a European point of view, obviously, in feeding into the grid, and we're all going to be interconnected. But from a national policy, it is not on the cards, and it's not something that we look at. But from the renewables point of view, yes, in terms of the options that are there, from anaerobic digestion, the wind and the solar are the big ones on it, and in terms of going offshore and the opportunities that are bringing there, I think I was speaking recently to a conference down in Dingle, and the message I was given is, people need to understand, well, what is our energy demand locally, and farmers are doing it now. The dairy farmers down there, Janique Alvin is on later on today, talking about what is the energy that we use, what's going to be the solution for them, is it solar? And then they're looking at that with the community, and then is there a combination in terms of the local hotels going to say switch to biomass? There might be a willow opportunity in terms of feeding in the stocks there, and then a potential for an AD plant somewhere on the peninsula that would feed in terms and need the heat, perhaps as part of other district heat. So it's designing the system and thinking as a system-wide to say this is the renewable options. But as Oisin said, there's two steps to sustainable energy. Energy efficiency, we say that should be first in terms of the best way to go, and then renewables in terms of reducing your demand, get off that. And why do you do it? For three reasons. it's good for it saves you money in terms of efficiency. The easiest and the cheapest energy is the energy you don't pay for, which is the efficiency side of it. So it's cost competitive. Security supply. We have a big demand in terms of coming from abroad. Yes, it's from the gas is Norwegian and all that, but those fossil fuels, the oil that we're taking to move us around the place in the cars, is imported. So if we can generate the energy locally, then that security supply we're generating, it's our supply. Growing it in the fields, growing the solar, generating it in the fields, generating the wind, generating it offshore, we become the self-sufficient. And then the last one is the environment, because that's where it's at.
So how self-sufficient can we be by 2030?
Well, in terms of the target for our electricity grid, it's to get up to 80%. We're at 40% now on average, and that's across the board. Some days we're generating well in excess and close to 80. And again, through Eirgrid, managing that grid, it's the smartest grid in the system, so balancing the system and working through that. Okay. So we've that targets in terms of that's there. The renewable heat is the challenge. And that's where the big, in terms of getting in there, how are we going to heat our homes? And again, switching that to electricity is part of it, but also district heating opportunities in terms of, as you said, the small scale, but anaerobic digestion, looking at the renewable heat and how that feeds into it. And that's, across our heat, electricity and transport, the renewable targets that are set out, I think, are well achievable.
Okay, so Mark, from an Eirgrid perspective, as we look forward to energy policy, the path to 2030, where do you see the challenges and opportunities from your perspective?
Can I duck your question and go broader and say we need as a country to get behind the climate action plan? That is the challenge, actually. It's not about, people will talk about planning, they talk about infrastructure, etc. A lot of those are being fixed. The issue in my head is get the people of the country behind the climate action plan. It is not perfect. No plan is perfect. But when you talk about electricity and an ambition for 80%, it's an incredible pathway to an ambition that I believe is achievable. When you talk about electrification of transport, people are buying electric cars. It makes no sense to drive a diesel car anymore. Get behind that proposition. Get behind the notion of retrofitting houses and saving energy, not using energy.
Well, Mark, can I just stop you
there?
Let
me just finish on the other two dimensions, which is agriculture. And I heard the minister talking, and I listened really carefully to the previous. I'm not an expert in agriculture, but I will say one thing. I thought the minister was superb, and I thought, in fairness to Tim Cullinan from the I.F.A., the consumers have to start taking some responsibility. We're leaving it, we're saying it's up to the policymakers, it's up to the I.F.A., it's up to the minister. It's up to us as consumers. There's 5 million people in this country who make choices every day of their life in terms of what we eat, etc. So, just to finish, we as a nation have a choice. We have a plan that's not perfect, but it's a bloody decent plan by any standards in Europe or globally. We need to get behind the plan, and we need to start putting our shoulder to the wheel, and we mightn't achieve 50% reduction in CO2 emissions, but by goodness we could get close to it if we all get behind it.
And is the Irish Power Grid, are we ready to...
The Irish Power Grid, don't worry about the Power Grid, we have a plan, right? In 2007, a Green Party Fianna Fáil coalition said we're going to have 40% of our electricity come from renewables, and people laughed. They laughed at Minister Ryan and Gorman, and they laughed at Bertie Ahern. They said, not possible. Not fantasy politics. And people in my organisation, which I didn't work for at the time, but I can understand the sentiment, say, not technically feasible. We achieved 43% in 2020. In February, 53% of all of our electricity came from renewable sources. We can achieve 70 to 80% of all of our electricity from renewables by 2030. We have the plan. We have an incredible ecosystem, not just Eirgrid, all of the developers in offshore wind, onshore wind and solar. We can make this happen, and we're going to make it happen.
All right, Oisin.
I just want to make a point there about targets. I think Mark said is really interesting. I first attended an energy conference, and it was 2006, and Noel Dempsey, who was then Minister for Energy, who was quite interested in these issues, said, "I'm delighted to announce that our target for renewable energy, or new electricity, for 2010 is now going to be 12.5% as opposed to 10%, because I've been told that's what's going to happen anyway." So that was the way we approach targets in Ireland, and it's the way the civil service have always approached targets. They don't like targets unless they know exactly how they're going to get there and it doesn't involve too much stretch or innovation. What was unique about that target that was set by the Fianna Fáil Green Party government that of 40% by 2020 for renewable electricity was that it was a real stretch target. And we did it. And that's the way we've approached targets in Friends of the Earth for so long. It is not about punishing ourselves. It is about stretching ourselves to achieve what will be a really positive outcome. Obviously, and now, of course, which has been brought home to us in recent weeks, in the face of a catastrophic alternative if we don't act on climate change. So we shouldn't be afraid of targets. We should embrace them. And this is a race. The race that we describe it as the race of a lifetime to avoid the worst effects of climate breakdown by leaving no one behind. And both of those are essential. We do, I have been known occasionally to disagree with the IFA. We've been very much in lockstep on, for example, the potential for solar. And it's finally we're getting the government to take away the planning restrictions for solar electricity. But the issue around a fair transition is you have to be committed to the transition. And then you'll have the likes of us really pushing for the fairness to be there, but we need to get both.
Okay, and this is a very broad point on what Mark said and what you said there in relation to not leaving people behind and being fair. And I'll put this question to you: when we look at our shopping habits, how they've changed in recent years, the discounters are growing. It's because we're going in there to spend our money on cheaper food. That's what we think of food. Now, the percentage of our disposable income being spent on food has diminished to below 10%, but that's because 30 years ago we haven't got the sort of daily costs that we now have, mobile phones or whatever else. The point being that when we look at retrofitting and we look at making all these changes and getting rid of our diesel car, and I don't know whether you got rid of your diesel car that you told Mary Wilson on drive time a couple of years ago you were still driving, but that this is the challenge, that we do want to make a difference. But Mark, we can't afford it. If you want to drive an electric car, you have to have a lot of money in the first place to buy one. If you want to retrofit your house and get a grant to do it, you have to have a lot of money in the first place to be able to do it. And for people to make decisions in relation to buying organic food, they have to have the money to be able to do it. Isn't that a big problem? I'll put that question to all of you. Maybe I'll go back to you on that. Mark or Declan.
Just in terms of the thing, you have to have a lot of money to do it. In buying an electric car now, and the whole idea is a couple of points. You were talking about, how do we transition and where we need to go. I think everybody needs to think about how we heat our homes and how we move around the place. But the electric car, if people do the maths now to say, well, okay, and it's for 80% of the country are only doing journeys that are around 80 kilometres a day, maximum, maybe 50 to 60 kilometres a day. When they look at what they're spending on petrol and diesel, and they look at what they're paying on fuel, and they add in what am I repaying on my car costs, and they look at the maths, and then they can go to a dealer and say, well, actually, I'm paying 700 euros, including my fuel, or 800 euros. You'd probably get an electric car for 600 euros a month, and the fuel bill might be 50 or even 30 euros. So the maths add up. And they will allow you to say, well, okay, you get a trade-in on your car and you'll get the new car on that basis. So the maths, it's not that you need a lot of the money up front.
Do you find that the financial institutions, there's buy-in from financial institutions whom we go to get loans to do all of this? Are you finding they're in step?
They're very much in step. And the dealerships and all that, in terms of the offerings that are there. Similarly, in terms of your retrofit, that now through credit unions looking and say, well, okay, when you take this is the cost, it's going to pay back. You'll get some energy savings in terms of off your bill, so you'll have more money to repay the loan, and you can actually get the grant knocked off the loan. So we will help you finance that and pay for it over time. You don't need the money up front. So financial institutions, credit unions, banks, and others are part of that as well, and that's the idea behind the one-stop shop. Now, the market is moving and developing, but people are now seeing, because of the cost of energy, it's actually making sense to switch off fossil. And the other things in terms of I can do make other savings in terms of just switching things off and turning things down as well in terms of my energy efficiency piece.
Okay, and
but
just to the retro...
The myth about you need the money up front is actually not.
Well, to retrofit your house, you'd need 20 grand to do a decent job up front before we even go near you.
It depends.
20 grand. I was quoted 120 grand, so I was for dry lining.
And again, it depends on what you need to do with the house. There's an 80% grant for people that just want to do cavity wall and attic insulation. So you can do it step by step. You don't have to do it all in one go. You decide, well, okay, do I need to do this?
You do have to do it all in one go, do you not? You have to meet a minimum BER.
Again, you can work a pathway. You can decide to do that yourself. Say, well, okay, I'll do it step by step in terms of working through it. So it's not about one big bang. You get better benefit because you could get money for doing your windows and all that in terms of the doing it in one go. So there's incentives to help those people to do it in one go. But there's also the opportunities in relation to saying, I do it step by step because I can't afford to do it in one go.
Okay, but
so
Mark,
there's options.
Okay, well, Mark, just coming back, you're saying we should all be driving electric cars. You know, we're sort of climate shaming people that would like to do a lot of these things, but they just can't afford it, particularly at the moment.
I didn't say. I said the climate action plan in terms of the different dimensions is the right plan. It will happen at an organic rate that people can absorb. You can't force people, you can't bully people. But to Declan's point, the economics, now Ukraine has upset the economics a bit in fairness, although one might argue it's upset it, or it has changed the dynamic in a positive way. But the economics around driving electric, the economics and the grants, I don't think people have any idea, and I don't work for SEAI, I work for Eirgrid, of the incentives that are in play to retrofit or partially retrofit your house are staggering. Now, I think one of my bugbears is COVID was gone, and I said to the minister 18 months ago, when COVID's gone, we should have a massive education campaign, and then Ukraine happened. People don't understand what's out there, and the opportunities, the grants, the incentives are phenomenal, simply phenomenal. And if we could get the public discourse going, if we could have the right debates, and people could have a chance to look at the numbers, they will be absolutely, really, really surprised.
And Oisin, I'd like to come in and just one question, Declan. Do we have the skill set there, to actually meet the demand at the moment?
We have the bottleneck is the supply chain. We need to get more people working in it, and that's where the opportunities are in terms of getting people, apprenticeships, electricians, plumbers, getting in there. There's a massive employment opportunity in there. We reckon that there's about 3,000 to 4,000 people working in retrofit, and we need 25,000 people working in that. So that is an area in terms of growing, but it's up to that. But to Mark's point as well, and people in the education say, we want everybody to drive electric cars. We want 40% of the cars to be electric. That's close to 1 million. They say, we won't achieve that. But actually, if we can get 1 million less petrol and diesels, do we need 2 cars in a house? How do we look at this? So it's not that every petrol and diesel car will be off the road. There's still going to be cars around the place. They will be needed for some jobs in terms of towing and work cars around the place as well. So the market is developing, the cars are developing, the technology is developing, the battery technology is changing. Year after year, month after month, it's changed. The prices are changing and coming down. So at the moment, 20% of new cars that have been sold are electric. We had 13% last year. So people are saying, this is it. And anybody that's thinking of buying a new car should be saying, listen, I go electric. Now, dealers are pushing stock that they have. There's SUVs, bigger cars than you actually need. So thinking about the way you move around the place, do I need a big second car? Can I do with a small runabout that's electric?
Okay.
And it's all about rethinking how we do that.
Point, Jamie.
Okay, Mark, and then Oisin.
In 2005, people would have said all this stuff about onshore wind is fantasy stuff. We don't have a supply chain. Damien, your words. Ireland has arguably the best supply chain in the world on onshore wind. Now we're moving into the offshore space, etc. We've now talked about we don't have a supply chain for retrofitting of houses. I would put my house on the fact that within 5 to 7 years we will have one of the best ecosystems in the world for retrofitting houses, because we've set the policy framework right, the grants are staggering, the market will follow and will deliver, and we will see an exact repeat of what happened in onshore wind.
So on the macroeconomics and the macro policy, I agree with Declan and Mark that like we're in a good place. But actually, as a regular person, I struggle with both of those things. I haven't finished my retrofit yet, and I still drive my diesel car. I've only had 3 cars in my life. They're all second hand. I have 2 kids, 2 dogs. My brother's a wheelchair user. Can I get a big enough electric car? I have no driveway in my urban house, so that's a charging challenge. So and it's time. It's time particularly when you're changing technologies, either in your house, which involves people coming into your house as well in terms of project management, or your car in technologies. In order to get it right, in order to make that investment correctly, you have to give it the time, which can be challenging in the modern preoccupied world to do. So I actually appreciate the challenges there are to get from the macroeconomic framework that is positive for these things to getting it actually rolled out generally.
It's kind of a mirror image of the whole agriculture. You go at the micro level, you go to farms, and you'd say, well, that farmer, God, he's doing great work, and then when you put the macro together, it's an industry.
It's the same in the case that there's lots of individual farmers doing great stuff, but in order for that to work, to get to 22%, never mind 30, every farmer has to do that.
Yeah, you're only as strong as your weakest.
That involves more Teagasc support workers and more everything else.
Yeah, Stephen, can I just come back to you?
On the transport piece,
yes.
For example, a lot of farmers saying to us, we've actually gone away from using large vehicles around the farm. We use not motorcycles, but the quads. Much more efficient, and again, electric quads coming out. So it's utility, understanding what do I need and how do I get around and what do I need for that. Yeah. And the challenge, as Oisin said, is for people that don't have parking spaces, how do we get the charging to those and how do we look at their... So it's horses for courses in terms of transport solutions for your house, for your how you move around.
Okay, go.
So the schemes are very good now, but I would still be slightly worried that it is a sort of, it's not market, is not quite the right word because it is so subsidized, but it is like, here's our stall, come to us and you can get these grants. And that's like for an audience like those of you here today who are very engaged, that's fine. But particularly in the context of Ukraine and of energy poverty, I think we really need to go out to where the most vulnerable people are at right now. Like we've been advocating, now we haven't actually had a meeting with you about this, but that the SEAI needs to sit down with Age Action, with Vincent de Paul, and say, how can we get out and talk with the people you serve to make sure they aren't left behind? And that's true particularly as well in rural areas where there's a real risk that there's economies of scale in urban estates. We might see it take off there. But what about people who are dependent on solid fuels in rural areas? We need to actually go out to where they're at with wraparound services. I'm old enough to remember the change over to fossil gas, natural gas in Dublin, where they came to your door basically, and it happened, and they offered it to you. We need to do the same with retrofitting.
It is one of the, because our CEO is chairing as part of the vulnerable the emergency action groups in relation to the energy prices, working with MABs and with Energy Action and looking at how do we actually work with those most vulnerable, and also looking at reaching out through our communities. We have a network of 600 sustainable energy communities and helping them to train in the community centre, train people how to reduce energy and working through that. So using those networks, so it's really important to help people.
All right, Stephen, can I come back to you again? And I mean, forgive me, I know you're now in the financial services sector, but you did, and you're obviously still very much among farmers and landowners.
Myself, Damien, so
is right.
Probably the only farmer in the panel, isn't it?
You are, yeah. Well, you're probably an urban farmer, are you? Of sorts.
I don't think my potatoes count.
But anyway, no, but Stephen, I just want to come back because a lot of our audience here will be people that are landowners and that are looking to diversify and are looking for alternatives and are looking to maybe play their part and feed into the grid as such by doing something on their farm. And that could be wind energy, it could be solar, it could be anaerobic digestion, it could be microgeneration, whatever. So what are the opportunities and what are the challenges and what needs to be done to give landowners, if we call them that rather than farm, but landowners, viable alternatives, which at the same time it's a win-win situation because not only are they maybe finding an alternative source of income for themselves, but obviously reducing their carbon footprint in doing so and providing us with renewables.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on what level they want to be involved in terms of
what are the most common questions you've come across, common issues in that regard?
What schemes are out there, first of all? How can I generate electricity on my farm and export it back to the grid? What can I do with my 5-acre paddock that is not very productive or whatever? Can I put a windmill on it, for example? And look, it comes back to the point that I said, it depends on what level of engagement they want with renewable energy. At the moment, if they are willing to commit their land for 15 or 20 years, then they'll get a lovely rent, presuming that they're close enough to a grid connection or it's possible, or in the right part of the world or country, for a solar farm. And look, there's plenty of farmers who've taken up that option, but to me that's not really engagement. It's not really being part of the renewable energy momentum. They get a lovely income and there's good tax incentives and whatnot, but that's it in terms of actually.
Does this reticence still exist when it comes to land use in terms of food or fuel?
The food
is that
versus fuel,
disappeared?
I mean,
Does it?
Forget about that. I mean, bear in mind, it wasn't that long ago there was 1 million acres of oats grown in this country to feed horses, which was our chief power supply on farms. So that debate has already happened. So it has, and that's whenever we were feeding a bigger population as well. So look, I think there's a
But I
place
just wonder
for both
why
of them.
forestry cover is still so low in this country. I mean, Ivan Yates, as the Minister for Agriculture, said we'll get it to 10% 25 years ago. It hasn't happened, and I'm just wondering, you know, what are the challenges that, you know, that farmers identify for not growing feedstocks for renewables?
But the growing feedstocks for renewables, what are the options apart from forestry? Not everyone wants to go into forestry. Not everyone. Typically, the worst performing land on the farm will go into forestry, if at all they go into forestry. And there's plenty of farms that they just feel that it wouldn't be worthwhile for them to go into forestry. Now, in terms of what's coming down the line and how farmers can actually really be in the driving seat of renewable energy production, you have microgeneration, the microgeneration scheme, super scheme. If you have a high demand on your farm, if you're a dairy farm, pig farm, poultry farm or whatever, solar makes absolute sense for that. If you're like me and you're a tillage farmer and you have plenty of roof space, but you don't have a very high demand, installing solar panels to export only, it doesn't really stack up. You're still chatting about it 8 or 9 year, 10
Steve, I have to ask
payback
you,
period.
you're a farmer and you're a journalist.
Farmer.
And you're talking about engagement, lack of engagement. The climate has never been better, and I've no conflict here. I run the transmission system, so I'm kind of a million miles away from farms and from distribution and from homes, etc. What is the issue that's stopping you getting involved? Because I've never seen a climate so more receptive to getting people into the energy system,
Absolutely.
wanting you
This
to invest.
This is look.
Giving,
Look
no, hold on,
around
let me
you.
finish.
There's a room
What
full
do
of
we need
farmers
to
who are-
fix?
who are
Or what do
bulling
we?
to get
And
involved.
I don't have the power, but I'm really interested. You've an incredibly important voice in this. What needs to be done to move the dial? Because you have the asset, the land asset. I worked for Quilter for 10 years, and our land asset we turned into renewable energy assets. What does the system need to do to get people like you and people in this room desperately wanting to be part of this? Because I thought the incentives were there, I thought the policy was there, I thought the vision was there. What is the missing bit that you can say to me, to Declan, and indeed that I can move and we can pass on to the Minister to get you passionate about this and
Too much
wanting?
red tape and bureaucracy, is there?
I don't know.
Well,
but
look, if I install, we'll say a 30 kilowatt rooftop solar PV system at the moment with the sole purpose of exporting to the grid,
right.
today can I do that?
My understanding is very shortly you can, and you're going to make a lot of money.
You
Am I wrong on that?
You can't because if you're going through the ESB's NC7 process to export that volume of electricity to the grid, there was a limited window for 150 applications to take part in the pilot project. Now that's just after opening up again as of July 1st, as far as I understand,
Declan's probably
for
more
another
competent at this
250.
than me, yeah.
But it's limited to 250, and it's still a pilot stage, and it'll be later on in the year, if I'm right in saying, before it actually opens up to the wider public. I mean, that's not good enough.
Just to come back, there's two parts of it. One in terms of where do we need to start, and in terms of what might unlock the things, and also then to address your particular point. Even talking to the solar installers inside, they said, farmer, dairy farmer, chicken poultry, anybody that is using the energy on the site, it makes absolute sense, and that's where it should be. Because the farmer is and Oisin and I have argued over times about schools, and I'm saying, why solar on schools? They're closed for 3 months of the year during the summertime, and it's saying about exporting, and it's not about the money, it's about where's the energy going and how are we using it. And for a tillage farmer, in terms of the stock sheds and all that, you might have roof space, but actually you don't have the energy use, so it doesn't consider something in terms of what you're doing and how it's working. We have to stop thinking about what's in it for me and the money. I'm part of the solution in terms of the energy system, and what we're seeing it working with the communities, as I said now, in Dingle with Dinny Galvin and the guys, they started, well, we're dairy farmers. What is the energy? We're really understanding when they use it, what's the time, what is the renewable solution, and then what are they part of in relation to it. We have to move away from...
and then Stephen come in, because you both want to come in on
I'll
that.
have to answer that, because I of course, in general, the more we can match generation and use, the better. But we are talking about decentralizing our electricity system, and we're also talking about bringing people with us. So making it as simple as possible in the case of farmers, in this case, and I'll mention schools too, to generate a revenue source. When we are talking, as you know, at the moment, as you know, in a quite tense way about potentially restricting other sources of income for farmers, it's really important to make the ones that we say are the future as simple and straightforward as possible, even if it's in some way less efficient from an electricity management perspective. If Mark says he can manage the grid with lots of cow sheds with solar on them, let him at it, and let us pay us.
Did I say that? But anyway, if I did.
Yeah, no, look,
and let's
fair point.
But the point
Here
is that people say, oh, he should be paid for it. We are the ones that are all paying for it. It's coming from our time in terms of
but the
feeding
PSO is zero for the renewables are so cheap and fossil. I think
I know, but and it's in terms of the opportunities that are there. That it's right in terms of saying we part of the solution, but you're actually making a better return. There's a better opportunity if you're using the energy on the site.
They're
not
it's
mutually
absolutely
exclusive.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
not.
exactly.
I would think they're not mutually
Exactly.
exclusive.
No, exactly.
So putting a solar panel on your farm shed and generating your own energy, but equally exporting into the grid, they can't be in conflict. They have to be good.
Tell that
That's
to the Department of
Okay,
Agriculture, because
just
if you
on
avail of
schools
town
and
support,
public
you can't
buildings.
actually
just a
export
line
to the grid.
on the schools issue, because Declan and I have, as he said, have disagreed about this. It's not about the schools making money, although they might benefit a little bit about it, and it's not. But it is about every school in Ireland becoming a solar school this decade, we would say, because they are centres of, particularly primary schools, they are centres of community engagement. They are where we win the battle for hearts and minds.
What about other public buildings?
Well, for sure, absolutely. But in other public buildings, they probably will be matched with energy usage. But in schools, you're actually matching with community appetite and community engagement. We polled on this recently, and 93% of people in Ireland said yes. Every school in Ireland should be a solar school within this decade, and the kids see the meter go backwards. You have educational programs around it. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be making. It's not a way to.
I tell you what. My first observation is that there was no need for me to be here today. I should have just let you all off.
They're getting their money's worth.
Yeah, they are. And second of all, we
We've
have
all got
another
off
panel,
script.
so we have to end it. We have to end it. It's not that we have to, because we have another panel coming on. But just before we finish, and it's like everything else, we're only getting going when we have to finish. But I do want to just give you all an opportunity. I'll start down at the end there, Stephen. Just with a take-home message, looking at your audience here today, looking at the people that have taken time to come here today. And as I said, a lot of them are landowners and farmers who really want to become more self-sufficient when it comes to energy usage, but also be seen to play their part in reducing emissions, and I suppose also securing another source of income on the farm, diversifying. And I mean, it's, as I said, win-win-win all around. So just bearing all that in mind, what is your take-home message? If 40 seconds each just before we finish. Stephen.
Knowledge is key, and there's plenty of knowledge here today. There are opportunities out there. Some are suited to your farm, some aren't. There are emerging opportunities. Hopefully, what the Minister pointed towards being the small-scale generation scheme, small-scale solar farms, hopefully that's going to provide a real income generator for the farm as opposed to micro-generation. And that's only in terms of electricity. In terms of AD, as I said, I was stunned by what the Minister said this morning. Things are going to happen in this space, and they're going to happen quickly. So if you're interested, get the knowledge, come chat to all of us, and start getting a plan into place.
Okay, Declan.
Okay, there's two things, and the one is, very often people say to us, where do I start? That's the big question. Where do I start? And it's all understanding the energy you use and getting there. And for farmers, you're part of the solution. It is you are part of our sustainable solution and our sustainable energy communities. We have 600 communities right around the country. So reach out to those communities, because they've done a lot of work in terms of understanding their areas, but actually get involved and start discussing, well, how can I be part of the solution? Could my field actually be there for the community solar farm? which would be a massive opportunity in terms of feeding into the local grid. How can I look at it in terms of working with you? Is there enough demand there for a local anaerobic digestion and groups of farmers? And look at what's happening in terms of the farming communities that we have. So encourage people to reach out and look at those and see, how am I part of the solution? And starting then with your own farm, and then outside of that, the roads, and understanding then the parish and the community and the village or the town. Where am I part of that solution? I think that's the big thing for me.
Mark? Two very quick, simple points. We started a journey 2 years ago called Shaping Our Electricity Future. Our job was to figure out, how do you get to a power system in 2030 that could achieve 70% of all of our electricity from renewable sources. That was under Richard Bruton. Minister Ryan came in subsequently and raised it to 80%. We embarked on a consultation process, which was described by many as one of the best ever undertaken by a state company. We were astonished by one message that came out of that. We thought we had all the answers. We're brilliant engineers, and we think we're the greatest company in Ireland, and we have all the answers to the power system. The people said in 4 months of consultation, we want to be part of the energy system. And our result was, we factored into the output that 500 megawatts of the future system would come from homes and farms around the country of Ireland. Not sure how we'll do it, but we got the most emphatic message from people saying, we want to be part, we want to generate electricity, and you need to help us make it work. And we listened and we factored it in. And now the job is to get you engaged and figure out how we make that work.
Okay. All right. Oisin, last word to you.
So it's really fantastic to hear Mark say that. And not only was it one of the best consultations that state companies run, any bit of the state hasn't run a better consultation than that was. But that outcome is what's really positive, because we've been plugging away at campaigning for community energy, campaigning for opportunities for farms and householders and communities to participate in the energy system for about 9 years now. And I don't know if you share this, but it has been very frustrating. It's taken far too long to get to the point that we're at now, where there are opportunities. But just to agree with Stephen, or to put it this way, I would hope that if you share any of those frustrations, either around AD or around electricity over the last decade, don't let it put you off now, because this is the moment where the state is getting its act together to enable all of us to be part of the solution. And we're running out of time in terms of the solution being enough to stave off real disaster, as we're seeing around Europe at the moment. So now is the moment for us all, of those of us who are interested, to step up.
All right. Well, Oisin, we leave it there, and thank you all for a very informative and very engaging discussion, and enlightening, I think, for a lot of us that are here on a very, very important subject. And sprightly, absolutely. That's need a bit of that.
It was holding back. It was good.
Questions and answers revived. Anyway, we're going to leave it there.